Hello, everyone. Good morning again. Welcome to track A of these breakout sessions, which is Philanthropy to Impact Investing. If you have accidentally boarded the wrong train, you are still welcome to stay here. We're very excited to have you here to listen to a wonderful panel that we have assembled. Thank you so much to all of you. The moderator this morning is Bill Burckart, who comes from Johns Hopkins University's Center for Civil Society Studies, where he manages the New Frontiers of Philanthropy project, and for which he helped put together a book which is forthcoming. And the book also includes a chapter written by Doreen and Rob from IIX and Shujog on social stock exchanges. So Bill is really an ideal expert to help lead us in this discussion, because New Frontiers is really what we're talking about here. So without further ado, I will turn it over to you, Bill, and thank you again for everyone for being here.
Well, it'll zoom in, so this will work. So thank you for the introduction. I don't know if that's on, but... Cool. Oh, okay. So I just want to take the opportunity to thank the Impact Investment Exchange and the Asian Development Bank for hosting this conference. And I think, you heard in the first panel this, this tension, Wolfgang articulated, this tension between the role of philanthropy, the role of impact investment, and that there is a lot of uncertainty, a lot of lack of clarity around this. And so I think this panel is particularly good, and you look at the experts that we have here, all pioneers in the field, all doing it in different ways, in different countries and in different formats. So what I'm basically going to do is give you the broad landscape, what is happening. I am then going to throw it to our panelists, ask them some tough questions. They're going to blow our minds with insights. And then I'm going to throw it to you guys, and you guys can be equally hard on them, really press them on these issues. And then we'll come back for the last 5 minutes and talk about, well, what are those next steps? What are the, we're going to articulate some issues, and what are the things that these panelists are going to do over the next 12 months to help us, solve some of these issues and strengthen the field. So let's jump into it. So the first question is, what's happening? Basically what you have are, economic, social, environmental problems that continue to persist and in some cases grow. Yet at the same time, you have the resources of government and philanthropy essentially rolling back in some cases due to austerity measures, but you also have philanthropy where it's kind of tapped out. So a lot of innovators or entrepreneurs have come along, and they are piloting these different innovations that are moving beyond grants. And so moving beyond grants to adapt a more investment orientation, a focus on outcomes measurement, social return on investment, and leveraging new tools. You are moving beyond bequests as the primary form of creating philanthropic wealth. There's this phenomenon happening around the world where, as a byproduct of privatization activities in both industrialized and emerging economies, you have a byproduct of these privatization sales going into the permanent creation of charitable wealth. This happened in Italy, in Germany, in New Zealand, and there's a real opportunity for it to start happening in emerging economies. We're moving beyond foundations as the primary vehicle that is mobilizing resources for these purposes. And finally, we're moving beyond cash to include technical assistance and volunteering as viable forms of support for the sector. Now, some of you might be looking at me like I just clubbed a baby seal, and you're thinking, well, you're not talking about philanthropy, you're talking about impact investment. And we are broadly defining philanthropy. We're saying it's the mobilization of private resources towards public purposes. We're really specific about that because as you look at the way that social purpose finance has been basically composed, you can start to see that there are some issues, and Wolfgang articulated some of them, but there are some issues around terminology, and I'll come back to it in a second. So let's go with social purpose finance 3.0. In the US, if you think about the first generation, and this is 2007 numbers because this data comes from the IRS and it only gets updated every now and then, So first generation philanthropy, 135 billion, of which private foundations constitute about 32 billion of that. Small percentage. So that's the first generation. Now this is, 2007, this is what it accounted for. You go to second generation, it's the rise of government subsidy of the nonprofit sector and social enterprises to basically fund these enterprises to deliver direct provisions. This was big in the 1960s with Great Society programs in the US and continued to grow over the decades. And at the same time, you have this rise in fee for service. Real social enterprise activities starts in the 30s and 40s, continues to grow in the 70s, and today, together you have about 1.3 trillion in social purpose finance. But it's tapped out. And third generation's emerging, and this is what we're all basically talking about, this, this mobilization of private investment capital. Now, one of the problems, and this is why it goes back to the name of this project, but also what Wolfgang was articulating, is that we're scratching the surface here. So you have these, these new entities, this impact investment exchange, Nexii, Monitor, these big names coming into the field, AVPN. Gin, tonic, which to anyone outside of this would be a cocktail, right? And Dasra. And so with the rise of these, the emergence of these new entities, they're going beyond grants using things like equity, which traditionally in the social sector, if you said equity, you would have meant fairness, not investment. You have things like social impact bonds. They're not actually bonds, but they're really cool. So, what are we supposed to do with that? Let's talk about the field is framed. Impact investment to some, mission investing to others. One, blended value investing. One big foundation does mission-driven investment. And the whole point is that you have all of this kind of chaos emerging. Now, when you start looking at these new entities that have emerged, these new tools that are being used, and you start to see what is the commonality here. That's really the point of this project, was to look at what is this new functional spectrum that's emerged? What are the unifying themes? And most notably is the theme of leverage, right? I'm not the first person to say this. Everybody else has said this. Leverage, that's the whole point. It's getting more leverage out of charitable resources and/or private investment capital. So this is coming in a number of different ways. This is coming in the form of new actors. And so this is everything from capital aggregators, like you would think of the community development financial institutions in the US, microfinance intermediaries around the world, social stock exchanges like our host, capacity builders like Dasra in India, and part of the whole venture philanthropy movement. And this general shift for online exchanges, where people are starting to shift how they exchange in this place, in this space rather, moving it online as opposed to traditional forms. You have philanthropic banks coming up, and this is where foundations are realizing that complete reliance on grants is not going to get the job done. And so through a combination of program-related investing and mission investing, they are starting to leverage their endowment investments in social purpose ways. Still really small if you look at the amount of charitable funding that goes out every year by foundations in the US. It's about 1/10 of 1% goes out as program-related investments. So you think about something like equity that is really needed in the sector, and that's like 1/10 of 1/10 of 1% of all the resources. So there's still a lot to do, but it's emerging. So you have new tools that are being used. This gets back into equity. This gets back into loans and credit enhancements. Insurance, really big in the emerging economies. Social impact bonds, grants that are now leveraging people through prizes. They're leveraging ideas through crowdsourcing, and they're leveraging resources where you have grants that are coming in to help incentivize other private investors to get involved because the grants can help lower the risk. So now, with the emergence of the new actors, the use of the new tools, you have the development of these new cross-cutting issues. demand side of the equation. What does it look like now? You know, the lady from Rockefeller Foundation articulated that, you know, we're starting to focus on the demand side. Well, great, that's awesome, because we need to. We need to know what that side of the market looks like, and no one's really done an adequate job. A lot of the stuff that's happened so far and the infrastructure that's been in place has been focused on the supply side. Blended value. Can we measure social return in the same way as financial return? Do we want to have those kinds of hard metrics? You look at a lot of the leading measurement systems, and hopefully some of our panelists will talk about this, but there are some serious limitations, and this goes back to the idea of, you know, metrics can do good, metrics can do bad. Distributional impacts. Who wins and who loses in this new marketplace? There's going to be subsectors of this field that have more tangible assets in play. They're going to attract more private investment capital. What about the areas of the field that don't? This gets into this whole Matthew Bishop philanthrocapitalism. This is the greatest thing since sliced bread. And Mike Edwards, who says, whoa, hold up, you're going to lose the heart and soul of the civil society sector and the general purpose that it has. What's the policy agenda? How do we lower the barriers to entry into this field, both from a supply and a demand side? How do we incentivize this action? And it's going to be different from country to country. And there's a lot of really interesting, actually just in Brazil, a new global impact investment policy exchange or initiative just launched. So it's really exciting developments, right? And then finally, it's the global landscape. It's looking at all these innovations. How are they manifesting themselves around the different regions throughout the world? And how are they manifesting themselves within specific industries? And then the final question is, so what does all this mean? That's the point of this panel. They're all going to tell us. They're going to tell us exactly what it means. So to basically tease this out, I'm just going to really quickly go through, just very quickly introduce. So Tamzin Ractliffe, did I say that right? Founder of Nexii, has been a pioneer in this, we call it social investment space, or impact investment space, however we want to say it, for many years, and is, when we think about social stock exchanges, she has been at this longer than anybody. Harvey, Monitor Group, Inclusive Markets, awesome guy, very smart, very perceptive, just did a report on Blueprint to Scale, talking about what is the role of philanthropy in impact investment. Neera with Dasra, I mean, when you think about sophisticated philanthropy and anybody thinking about this sort of stuff in India, you immediately go to Dasra, and so we're very lucky to have you here. And Simon has recently founded the Asian Venture Philanthropy Network, which is a sister to the European Venture Philanthropy Association, I believe, and is also somebody who can really give us the great insights of the actual high net worth individuals that are deploying their capital. Or not, we'll see. So let's go ahead, I guess, and get it started, and start with, let's start with Harvey. So the framing for this particular session was philanthropy to impact investment, suggesting that there was this transition from philanthropy to impact investment. But as Harvey can tell us, or hopefully he will, that his report articulates this idea that maybe the framing is wrong. And maybe that's what's leading to some of the tensions that I think Wolfgang articulated this morning at the panel. And so I guess I would ask Harvey, if from philanthropy to impact investment, if that's the wrong framing, what's the right framing?
Yeah, so I think, I guess our framing would be that, market-based solutions, if you think about that as a kind of, another term to add to the chaos in the iceberg, to throw in, it's just a fundamentally different kind of intervention, right, than the traditional grant-based approaches to development. And so it's not about transitioning from one to the other, it's about saying, so it's about understanding when you should use market-based solutions to development and then what you need in order to do that. And so it's not about a transition from one to the other, but it's about saying, do I want to move into doing this and what capabilities do I need to do that? I do think in a very micro level, though, when we looked at what we did in our report, I don't know if it's worth bringing up any of that.
Someone's got the PowerPoint.
Someone's got the PowerPoint. So what we talk about in the report is, and I've got a few copies here in the bag if anyone's interested, is actually there's a lot of hype going on at the moment in the impact investing space, right? So when we think about, it's the right one, all the stuff that's happening around impact investing, JP Morgan says it's going to be a $1 trillion asset class, we're all going to make hundreds and billions of dollars in profit, governments are setting up funds, the G20's, getting excited about it. It's all really taking off at the moment, right? 200 impact investing funds. But when we look at the experience on the ground, when we actually did a study in Africa looking at over 400 inclusive businesses, we actually found that very few of them are actually viable and actually scaling, right? So we did a search for the most promising inclusive businesses in 9 sub-Saharan African countries and actually found that very few of them are viable and scaling. And actually, of the ones that were viable and at scale, their net margins were pretty slim, right? So this is not the rosy picture of high returns, opportunities everywhere that some people have been led to believe. And then on the right-hand side, this is what we hear from investors all the time, right? It's hard to put capital to work. It's really hard to find good opportunities at the moment. And so we thought, why is that happening? These are Acumen's numbers as well. We did this study with Acumen. They've looked at over 5,000 companies, put money to 65, now 70. Their 8 most profitable investees, actually these are the 8 profitable investees, I would say, made 6% profit after tax. And they expect after all this hard work in terms of selecting the best investments and really putting a lot of effort into post-commitment, post-investment support, they're going to get 1x return from the portfolio. So why is this? We're saying it's a tough environment. I mean, we all know this. Working with a BOP is challenging. It's not just limited incomes. It's irregular incomes, tight cash flow, poor demand, value chains that aren't developed. And you need new models, right? You can't take the same models that you develop for the top of the market and apply it to the BOP. And that takes time, takes effort, takes money. And often the value chains don't exist, right? So my colleague Mike Kobzanski has this great quote and he says, it's like Google trying to build the internet first before you could launch it. I mean, that's what some of these businesses are really trying to do. So it's very, very challenging. I won't go through the example, but so just to set up very quickly, what we've said is there's this thing called the pioneer gap when you talk about developing new models and new markets for impact investing. And what's really interesting is when we thought about this journey, we thought a lot of people talk about the fronts and ends of this spectrum, right? So people talk about innovation, the new idea, the new technology, the plan, the entrepreneur with the spark. That's kind of on the blueprint stage. And then people talk about scaling, as though you kind of jump from one to the other, and people forget that there's all this stuff in between. And if it's a new model, you kind of have to validate it. You have to put a lot of time and money into validating it, and you won't get it right the first time round, right? So the validation stage is really critical. And then there's preparing, right? These markets, like I said, don't come ready-made. People don't demand the things that you want to sell to them necessarily. It may be beneficial for them, but they may not demand it, may not pay money for it. Distribution systems might not exist, so you've got to prepare the market. And what we find is typically the investors want to put money in at the later stage, right? I mean, everyone says, oh, I want to see it do, it's got to have unit break even, got to have confidence in the business plan, demand's got to be there. So on the right-hand side, right? But then what happens with the earlier stage in the pipeline? Who's actually going to create these businesses? So who's going to take it from the idea to actually being investable? And that's what we've called the pioneer gap. And I think it's obviously possible to play on the right-hand side of this, right? But you're looking at models that are more proven. I think the challenge for us who are interested in impact and in new ways of solving problems is actually having more models and more markets that capital can flow into. And so that's where we feel philanthropy can really play a role. And just very quickly, example from the MFI sector that all of us know or think we know well, right? We think it's commercially attractive, it's attracting billions in capital, it's had some setbacks in recent years, but it's really kind of still the kind of poster child for this sector in some ways. But we forget that the pioneers took a very long time to get this model to work, right? I mean, Grameen Bank took 17 years to break even, and the sector as a whole consumed $20 billion in subsidies globally over 2 decades. Loans, soft loans, grants, guarantees, and so on. But what's really interesting also is the pioneer effect, right? So after Grameen pioneered it, obviously the people that came after them to replicate the model took much less time, right? And so you see SKS doing it in 6 and Equitas doing it in 1. So we do believe there is a role for philanthropy in developing this pipeline. Coming back to the question, I know a very long-winded answer to your question, Bill. We don't think there really is a transition as such from philanthropy to investing. What we're talking about here is actually building businesses, right? Giving a grant to a business that's going to create return is an anomaly, right? And so we should understand when we're going to use it. It's going to be very targeted. So what we're saying here is, look, if you look at stage 2, there's a very specific need, which is who is going to back the piloting, the refinement, the validation of this model before it becomes investable and investor money can flow in, right? That's a specific need.